I want to ask Greta first about coming up with the ideas for this film and where all of this came from, because your background is really interesting, and I wonder if you can talk about how you came up with the idea of not just telling the history of this community, but who you included and why in that storytelling.
Okay, thank you. So, okay. I actually went to film school, and I had made a couple of fiction films, and was part of the team that produced the film about the 1979 March on Washington, Greetings from Washington, D.C., and there was a burgeoning of sort of gay and lesbian filmmakers starting to talk to each other, and that's how I met Robbie Rosenberg. And he had a friend whose book was not published yet, John D'Amelio, whose book on the homophile movement he was very excited about. So he came to me and said, "You want to make a movie about this?" You're old enough now, you probably know Mickey and Judy. I felt like it was like, yeah, let's make a movie. So we started raising the funds, and Andrea came on very early, helping us write the grants and pull together people like Blanche and people from the Lesbian History Archives were consultants, and just trying to put together a team of people who could help us formulate a story. It came to me very early on, and the team agreed with me that doing the homophile movement was way too narrow. And especially for me, now it's funny, so we decided to go from the turn of the century to the 1969 riots, because the turn of the century was when sort of homosexuality went from being just a sex act to being sort of an identity, and loose communities began to be formed. And of course 69 was when everything changed, not just for the gay movement, for lots of movements. So that became really clear. So, and then John Scagliotti came on when, as a requirement of CPB, they said you need an executive producer, so he came onto the project. And then we set up, Amy, I think we were working at Women Make Movies, and that's how you came in, because you were someone who knew how to organize things and had some administrative skills that I definitely lacked and still do. And so we set out, because I come from a very working class. It's funny because I've been thinking a lot about, because people have been asking me, how did you get what you now call intersectionality so well integrated into the film? I hadn't thought too much about that until I started to realize, actually, because I grew up in a public housing project on the edge of a university town. So where I lived was among people of color and lots of different cultures, so I knew that world. And then I was introduced to, film and higher culture at the university, and politics, and it was Ann Arbor, the birthplace of SDS, 1970, one of the first gay liberation groups outside of New York City. So all those things were, part of who I was. So when I was thinking about who to interview for the film and what kind of people we wanted to tell the stories, it was sort of intuitive, really, for me. And then we organized teams. Andrea and Amy was probably involved. The memory is not. The memory is an imperfect function. I'd have to go to the files to get all the. But basically, we organized teams in 8 cities. As you saw, there were a lot of personal collection researchers, and at that time there was a huge underground press, a women's press, a gay press, a lesbian press, put press releases in. We're making this film, we're looking for stories, we're looking for photographs, home movies, and then started doing pre-interviews with dozens of people that we pre-interviewed. And from the pre-interviews, we wrote a rough script based on that. So we knew, okay, these are the people who I felt, and with my team, felt could represent different parts of the story. So by the time we got the 16 millimeter film, because 16 millimeter film was expensive, I pretty much knew what we wanted to get out of each of the interviews. Unlike today, where Raphael, who's one of my recent grad students, a lot of them, I keep trying to hammer it in, do the research before you do the bloody interview. And he got it. He made a brilliant film. so then we sent these teams out, and then also what they were tasked with was convincing people who had lived their entire lives in the closet to allow us into their personal scrapbooks. And it was the people were like, wait, why would you want a picture of me and my friends on the beach? And we're like, because that's history. But it was really difficult to convince people, especially difficult to convince women who were then at more risk and now still are at more risk. At that time, you could lose your children, your job, your house, everything, your friendship circle. I mean, this was in the early 80s, and so this was a difficult task. And I think probably you and your friends were the ones who helped me get Audre Lorde to convince to say, yeah, these people are cool, you can trust them. And Audre was the first person and the only person that I've ever agreed to let her see the film and see her interview, because she was like, I'm not going to let my words be twisted. She was a woman of the word, right? So I don't know, I guess I was cocky enough to think, well, of course you're going to love my film. So I agreed to that, and she did love the film.
Well, let's talk a little bit about this archival footage, because that was also a daunting task, and I want to ask Andrea about the process for unearthing some of this incredible footage and what was available, what wasn't available, and how you, because again, we're going back to 1985, there was no Google, right? No cell phones, no
computers,
no chat groups. You couldn't ask your friends so quickly. So how did you attack this huge task and then come up with award-winning footage?
Basically, the material in the film, there wasn't like sort of one source. Every clip you see came from someplace else. I mean, there just dozens and dozens of different sources that we went to. But in general, those sources fell into kind of three categories. One is clips from Hollywood movies, which we could only use a few of because, first of all, until the demise of the motion picture code, there weren't many Hollywood images of queer people. And the ones that did exist were very stereotypical and disturbing, let's say. But there were some. And I was really helped with that by the film historian Vito Russo, who hadn't written The Celluloid Closet yet, but he was working on it. And so he would, call me up when he would spot some image that could possibly be used in the film. And so that was one source of materials, like the gay cowboy, if you remember. Generally, the images, the sort of what you could read as gay images or gay lesbian images in cinema kind of fell into two time periods. Sort of at the very beginning of the motion picture code, 1934 was when it started, which was like a censorship body. In the very beginning, or before it, or in the beginning of it, before it was really consolidated and had this really strong power. And sort of towards the end of it when it was on the decline. So you can see, the Spoilers, which is this cowboy film, was, I don't know, I can't remember the exact year, but it was like in the early sound era, I think. No, it wasn't even in the sound era. It was in silent era, okay? So it was before 1930. And that clip is not representative of the film. It's just this crazy moment in the film. And because he was looking at all this stuff, he found it for us. And then in 1968, which is almost 1969, 1968 was the sort of the demise of the Hays Code, the motion picture code. We got that clip from The Killing of Sister George. But the thing about it is The Killing of Sister George today, like if you sat and watched the whole film beginning to end, it's kind of disturbing, its portrayal of lesbians. But I was really interested in taking these clips, these images out of context. So first of all, it was filmed in the Gateway Club in London, and all those women were lesbians who patrons of the Gateway Club. So they're like real people looking like they normally do, and they were used as extras. That's one thing, because it was a real lesbian club. He filmed it. The other thing is, we took the soundtrack off it, which we put on our own soundtrack, which is Doris Day singing My Secret Love. So it was a way of kind of reclaiming these kinds of perhaps negative images of lesbians and gays and kind of turning them around.
One thing, Vito used to call Andrea and he used to play the game, he said, spot the homo.
Yeah, if he found something, he'd, call me up and say, check this film out. Of course, there was no video or VCR to watch it on. I had to sit in the Library of Congress and watch it on these big 35mm reels and in real time till I got to that split-second scene that we could use, and then back to... Anyway, and then with news, then I turned to newsreels and many different archives. National Archives in Washington was a big source because that stuff is copyright-free, but I went to many archives. And again, was kind of looking at images, how to kind of read lesbian and gay images into a genre, a kind of nonfiction film genre that basically didn't supposedly have any lesbians or gays in it. So it was a kind of reading against the grain. And then, of course, all the people that we found who either appear in the film and let us use their photos in home movies, or in many cases, friends of theirs. Someone they remember. Oh, I wasn't there. Didn't someone have an 8mm camera back then? Who was it? That kind of thing. And then we'd have to track down all those people. So those are kind of the three main kinds of images that appear.
But Amy, young Greta comes to you. She's a young happening chick. She's got some money in her back pocket. She says, I want to make this film. What was your response? How did you come on board, and how daunting was your task?
So I guess the backstory of this is that Greta, Andrea, and I all worked at Women Make Movies. In fact, I think Greta was the one who originally hired me at Women Make Movies years
That's
years
surprising that I had such authority.
And so when they got the grant for Before Stonewall, it was a pretty magnificent breakthrough. I don't think that... nobody imagined that they could have gotten that much money for a documentary film. It was pretty sizable at that time. So I think my role really was I wanted to work on the film, and I thought that it'd be great. I didn't have very much experience, but I thought that they needed a token straight person. So I volunteered myself to be that person, and I think in terms of the actual filmmaking, it was really scrappy. I had worked a lot in the Asian American independent filmmaking community, and so I used to produce this film festival that was the Asian American International Film Festival.
I think I was a projectionist at that, yeah.
Yeah, and so, so I knew all these filmmakers around the country, and so whenever we went into a city, we would identify different people because of that network in terms of, between Andrea's and mine and Greta's network and some others, when I looked at the crew, I realized that we had used a lot of people that we know just basically because we needed favors from everybody we could think of. And so it was just a combination of just trying to get the most that we could get with that money, and also to be able to try to be very, very creative. Greta mentioned that we went into 8 different cities, and so we would spend a very short period of time in each of those different cities, but we tried to do as much as possible, whether it was getting everybody's photographs or getting people's different memorabilia or meeting other people. I think that we just tried to optimize every location for what it could provide, and continue to build on that network, whether it was people behind the scenes or in front of the camera. So it was, and it was a real labor of love. Definitely the gay community was so excited about this film, and so everybody came out to volunteer. And you saw this scene called the Black Cat Reunion, and people were just really wonderful in terms of donating spaces and time and stuff. So it really kind of made itself to some degree. I think it really felt like the community, and especially a lot of these different organizations, really stepped up and helped out.
That reminds me of the people that you put in front of the camera were important, but the people that you put behind the camera were also significant. Can you tell us a little bit about some of these women?
I was there were like a handful of female feature documentary directors at the time. Julia Reichardt had made a couple of films which were really important to me and showing the way, and also she used oral history as history, and she was one of the first people to do that, and that helped validate us to do it. And then there were very few female crew members. It was really hard, so we used mostly Kathy Zoitlin and Sandy Sissel were early cinematographers, so they shot most of it, and then Jan Krapelin, a friend of mine, a straight man, did some of the shooting also. But then also, like as Amy said, when you look at the names, you see like we really used like we used people of color to do research in those communities, like Jewel Gomez. Without Jewel Gomez, we would probably have not been able to access. As a matter of fact, I came across a fabulous flyer because we kept going fundraising and looking for people throughout the process. A flyer, and it was this event we did. And there was an organization in New York then called Organization for the Other Black Woman. That's what the lesbian group referred to themselves. And so through that and Jewel, we were able to get images. But I think Mabel Hampton came from Lesbian History Archives, right? Yeah. So that was, and JT, the sound woman, she reminded me, she was working for me on a shoot that we're doing now, and she said, my very first sound job was interviewing Allen Ginsberg. I was like, oh my God.
Sure. I just wanted to say when I was talking about doing the research in the sort of official archives and how there was nothing there were some community archives already at that time, one on the West Coast and Lesbian History Archives. So we just want to give a shout out to Deb Adele because Lesbian History Archives was founded in 1974, right? Wow. So, there were community-based archives that were kind of trying to sort of fill in the gap of, the kind of erasure of lesbian and gay history, and in that way. So that was really invaluable, and I just want to thank you for that.
Yeah. And so, Blanche, this history is so important, and I think you have some can share some great insight on how significant this film and the history that was unearthed is for the community and for addressing the erasure of this history. Can you share with us a little bit about how you came on board?
Well, I don't know how I came on board. Greta called me, and we met lots and lots of times in your apartment, and we talked. I guess you had read 2 articles that I had written. One was called Women Alone Stir My Imagination.
I like that title.
And the other was called Female Support Networks and Political Activists, which is really these are 2 basic lesbian articles, and they were really kind of among the first published in various journals in the early 1970s. One was 1971. I guess they were both about 1969, 71. And I just want to say, I always say, never go anywhere without your gang. And the gang is here. Judith McDaniel, who published Audre Lorde, the Cancer Journal, and Jan Schwartz, and Charlotte Bunch, and the Furies, and Roxana Carrillo gives us the International. And none of this would happen without Claire Koss and Audre Lorde, who was my best friend and first lover. In the 50s, we met in 1958, and before Stonewall, there was the Duchess and Page 3. Anybody here remember Page 3? I mean, I am that old that I think I'm the only one left who used to pick up some wonderful women in Page 3. So
you identified with red.
I identified with red, pick and choose. Right. And the wonderful thing about the film is that you really do, from Stonehenge to Stonewall. We have been here forever, and we are still here. And there's something now about this global, the world pride moment. And here we are everywhere. I mean, walking to the Graduate Center across Macy's Pride, Macy's, I mean, the reality of we are here, we are everywhere, we are all queer. It's really quite amazing, but this was a path-breaking film. And when I was watching it, I was thinking, I'd love to know what's on the cutting room floor.
Yes.
You know,
We got to get that. It's in the barn of the executive producer. It's one of my tasks to get it out of that barn. I read in the paper today, in the BBC News, 3 million people in Brazil are marching for World Pride in response to the right-wing government there. And the Ukraine has the largest gay pride. It's doubled from last year to this year. So one of the things with thank you to Vilan having restored the film is that this entire new generation, led me to restore it. This whole new generation from Croatia to Russia to Africa to Latin American countries. The story, everyone relates to this movie, even though it's not their story. It's a story of every culture needs an origin story, right? We all need to think we came from somewhere and how did we get here? And somehow the film plays that role, and incredibly proud of that.
Maybe, Leslie, you can shed some light on queer cinema for us and how important these films are in reaching these global audiences and reclaiming this history and telling these stories.
Well, I do want to just acknowledge Blanche because, she's one of our most important historians. So I'm very honored to be here on this stage with you, honestly, truly. And I think our community is enriched by the fact that we've been able to tell our own stories. And this is the film, I think, is sort of the great example of that, is empowering a group of gay and lesbian people to make a film through public broadcasting, which is amazing when you think about that now, and tell their own story and tell our own story. And I think that's the sort of transformative aspect of this film. And it kind of leaves little breadcrumbs to Celluloid Closet and, other kinds of looking back at our own history, but really looking back and queering history, right? That's sort of going back and looking at those films and finding those moments. I was watching this film and reflecting on the idea of people coming out and how important that was. And Evelyn Hooker, she's so interesting in this film as well. But, this idea that we're out there, we're here, we're embedded in the society, but nobody is revealing themselves. And you can see the results today of this generation after generation of people coming out. Because now it really isn't, I don't want to say it's not a big deal, because of course we all know that it isn't easy for everybody in New York as much as it is in any other city in America or small town. But obviously our culture has shifted greatly. And, what we're able to do in this film is really look back at our heroes, at our people who are willing to tell their story. Because they're not the only ones, right? They're just the people that were willing to talk to you. And be revealed. So I really feel that this is a film to me that should be in every high school in America. I don't really know why it isn't part of curriculum. It's such an important historical record. And queer cinema itself, queer filmmakers, again, telling their own story, this all comes really right at this moment too, in the 80s and into the 90s, where new queer cinemas really starts. But documentary filmmakers are part of that, and not just fiction filmmakers. So.
I just want to say a word about the difficulties of coming out. Audrey and I taught a class in 1971, Women in America in Black and White. And we were at John Jay. Most of our students were police officers. They brought their wives and their mothers and their aunts and their girlfriends and sisters and so on. And then the bar girls found out we were teaching this course, and they came to the class. And we were posing initially as formerly married straight ladies. And then when the bar girls came, we were out. But that's not how we came out. We came out, and Marty Duberman is featured in the film. Marty had organized a meeting at John Jay of the first meeting of the Gay Academic Union. And this was, I think, 1971. And there was a fire drill. And we were all removed to the street. Whereupon the next day, the next Monday, the president got into the elevator with the president of the college, and he said, "I hear you had a great meeting interrupted by a fire drill." So we were out. But it was not something we intended to do. But we were coming out.
This is so interesting, because even the people who were organizing as gay people could not be out for so many reasons, whether it was internal or the fear of the people coming down. And that's why I think it's miraculous we got as many people as we did in the film who were willing. Think of it, they were on national TV at a time when there were no civil rights protections at all for being gay or a lesbian. You could lose everything. So, which is still true in many countries across the world.
And in states.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to note how key it is for people to tell their own stories, because the other danger is, you know, as a woman of color who has my story told by everyone on the planet, you know, having Greta be able to tell this history and put it in proper context, and the fact that you could unearth all of that, even if you did take other images that weren't intentional, it actually worked out well. And by the way, Andrea won an Emmy for that. So, but it is important because as gay culture becomes more mainstream, so to speak, it also then gets watered down and appropriated in ways that begin to erase it again. And I think we have to all support these artists and filmmakers and storytellers and historians to make sure that it stays authentic and true to its origin.
Well, and I just want to add that the facts are that if they hadn't told the story, no one would have.
Right.
That's the fact.
Absolutely.
That you have to tell your own story, because if you don't, no one else will. And these are the lessons we learn in our community over and over again.
I read somewhere that one of the commercials, CNN or FX or one of these things, they're going to do a film about life before Stonewall. And I'm like, I wonder if they're just going to, you know, remake before Stonewall or what? I mean, there's no one alive that they can interview. So what are they talking about? It's this commercial.
Isn't that called Mad Men?
Say no if they call you.
I'll tell them to use your film.
Speaking of scary things, one question I did want to ask you, you know, making this film at the time that you did, was there anything about it that scared you or gave you doubt or maybe gave you pause in the process?
Well, again, I was quite young, and I didn't quite realize what I would now when I start a feature documentary. I know the burden and the importance of getting it right. But then, I don't know, we had this team, and I worked with Robbie developing the story, and we just felt. But we did have quite a bit of pressure from the certain elements. Everybody wanted to be in the film. Let's just say everybody who was an out gay person wanted to be in the movie. So it was like, oh my God, I got so many phone calls, and so that was kind of strange. But wait, Andrea remembers my life better than I do.
I just think you need to clarify. People who were activists all wanted to be in the film, but Greta really wanted to tell the story of kind of ordinary people, you know, like a cross-section of the country of like people who were just living their lives. So she didn't want to make a film just about activists, but if she had wanted to, those are the people who all wanted to be in it. The people she wanted to have in it were much harder to convince.
Well, and speaking of like the film today for younger people too, is that I was in Munich at the Rachel Carson Center doing research on my other film, and I met this lovely couple. We became good friends. They were just here in New York with their 3 children, and their oldest son identifies as transgender. He lives in a small town in Nebraska, and he came to see the film, and he was so his emotions were so strong, he couldn't even talk to me. Like, he was just like, he knew nothing. He'd never heard of anything. So that's why that needs to be in every high school, indeed.
And also for funding, how difficult was it to take this subject matter to funders and try to raise money?
Well, interesting. One of the I think she was president of the New York Council for the Humanities. At the time, she was a closeted lesbian. Now she's a good friend of mine, and so she was like, pushing the film to be funded, and so that helped. And then NYSCA, I think Ruby Rich was the head of NYSCA then, so that was a pretty easy sell. Corporation for Public Broadcasting was pretty amazing, and it was a black guy, Don Marbury. And he was just a lovely guy, and I had many meetings with him, and he believed in the film, and his caution always was just, make sure you get the clearances, make sure you get the right insurance, but at that time, like now, if you got money from PBS or CPB, they'd be in your editing room, they'd be like on your back, they'd be wanting Final Cut. I mean, I had Final Cut on my first feature doc, unbelievable. And so that whole process, and then of course John, as executive producer, did a lot of ongoing fundraising, from house parties to other small grants, and what we were, I think, what now you call crowdsourcing on Kickstarter. It was all through the mail. You wrote a letter, you put it in an envelope, you put a stamp on it, and you mailed it, and you hoped the check came back.
Yeah, congratulations. It's such a brilliant film, and the work that you've done is phenomenal. Not to be personal or invasive, but so people who make movies can understand what it takes to make it. What was your budget? And how long did it take you to make the movie?
I think it took us 3 or 4 years from beginning to the first release, and we never raised a complete budget. It was under 300,000, and it's 10 minutes of film on 16 mil for the stock, the processing, the work print was $220. So a lot of the money just went to the straight lab, shall we say.
This is a wonderful film. It's amazing to see how far we've come in such a short amount of time. And you're talking about the new generation and how important it is to educate. And I'm curious, because now there's so much more acceptance of sexual fluidity and the gray areas of sexuality. So I was wondering if that was something that came up in your research, or something that you thought about including, like bisexual people, or...
No, we were gay and lesbian. We thought bisexual was confused. They hadn't figured it out, that's what how we saw it then. And also, people sometimes ask about trans. There are trans people in here. They were butches and femmes and drag queens, and the whole identity of trans, and this is a very last decade kind of thing. So they're there. They just might have that name, not have the name.
Quickly, you mentioned other people in other countries being interested in this film, and I think that's really important because it does tell us the origin story, and it feels to me like we have to keep retelling that this comes out of a movement. I mean, just this last week with Stonewall, we see even in the New York Times, they're talking about how it wasn't just Stonewall, it was a movement before that. So I'd be really interested in distribution of this film internationally. Has anyone thought about doing it in other languages? It has been dubbed, because I do think it should be in every school. People should know that it took a movement, and that movement is made up of everyday people, rather than just one event like Stonewall. And that's important all over the world. People are looking for that.
Yeah, I mean, we should talk about that further, and how to make that happen. And mostly it happens through film festivals, and through many countries don't have established now you have commercial streaming, but Netflix doesn't. They take name. They're not going to show a classic, iconic film like this, but there are beginning to be non-commercial. But yeah, I've been arguing for that. Even if we don't make money, let's just put it in Spanish and give it to every fucking Latin American country. So we'll talk about that. Maybe we.
Yeah, let me just add one thing. I attended a meeting of high school principals. Robbie Cohn at NYU called this incredible meeting of folks who want to get high school, this mandatory teaching of GLBT for mandatory in New York. And then he put it out nationally, and there are many states do not want GLBT. So there's this big movement for high school education to have it mandatory. And Robbie Cohn at NYU is working on that. You should be in touch
That reminds
with
me,
him.
when the film was first, but PBS operates where you have, they offer it to the national feed, but each station and each state decides. So on the first release in like 84, many stations were like, well, we're not going to broadcast this. So we went out and organized things. And a lot of times it was the first time the film and arts organizations and the gay groups had ever done anything together. And a few years ago, I happened to be in, Little Rock, for our atheist thing, showing a film about creationism in high schools, totally, tangentially related. And a guy came up to me and he said, I worked at the PBS station when you broadcast before Stonewall, and they wouldn't broadcast it, so we just made copies and gave it to people. And I was like, that's a copyright infringement, but thank you.
Learned. Any final comments about before Stonewall?
Well, the lessons learned are many. The first was get your own lawyer from the beginning. I made some mistakes by not doing that. I come from a culture where you got a lawyer when you got divorced, your car was repossessed, you got your kid out of jail. I never thought of getting my own lawyer to negotiate things with certain people on my team. So that's my first piece of advice. But mostly it's like, pick your battles. I've had this amazing career, and a lot of my films have been about writing women, lesbians, gay people, people of color back into history. I have a film, Man of Door with Mandela, just released on DVD through Kino, which does that. But also mentoring. I didn't have any film mentoring. I had like Emile D'Antonio and D.A. Pennebaker, but first of all, there weren't women directors, and there were no men who were really interested in mentoring, or maybe I didn't want them, probably both. But I do a lot of mentoring, but I don't just mentor women and lesbians and gay. I mentor the next generation, like Raphael, who are still excluded from the media landscape, who are telling stories, their stories. And since I have a lot of experience with telling the stories that have been erased and wiped out, I can be very helpful, and I do a lot of that through teaching and just through other methods. And I always have interns on my project. Izzy here is an intern who's wonderful, is working with us, NYU student, and pass it on.
Thank you. One last round of applause, please, for this incredible panel, these incredible filmmakers, and thank you all very much for coming.